Sometimes the universe doesn't whisper, it roars. And in that roar, we're forced to choose, collapse or confront. The grand double doors burst open with a thunderous slam, silencing the room as if struck by lightning. Heads turned in perfect sync, conversations halting mid-sentence as a figure stepped into the opulent wedding hall. Isabel. She stood still in the doorway, her 8-month pregnant belly stretching the fabric of her sky-blue maternity dress. Wind had tousled her dark hair, strands clinging to tear-streaked cheeks, but her eyes burned with fierce, unshakable purpose. In her trembling hands, she gripped a stack of documents, crumpled at the corners from the pressure of her fists. With each step she took down the marble aisle, the room echoed, amplifying the disbelief and tension around her. Her eyes scanned the stunned guests until they landed on him, Derek, the man at the altar. Her husband, the father of her unborn baby. The confident grin Derek wore vanished in a heartbeat. His soon-to-be wife, Kayla, turned to him in confusion, her hands clutching her veil. "Derek?" she whispered, her voice cracking with fear. "Who is she? But before we dive into this storm, drop a comment below with where you're watching from. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself when no one else would? If you believe in justice and truth, don't forget to like and subscribe." Isabel's life had always been defined by grit and sacrifice. Every morning she rose before the sun, poured herself a strong cup of black coffee, and drove across town to the charming lakeside inn she managed in Savannah, Georgia. It wasn't glamorous, not the kind of job that made headlines, but it was something she owned, something she built with her own 2 hands. The inn was quaint, just 2 stories high, with 14 guest rooms and a tight-knit staff of 12. But to Isabel, it was everything. Her pride, her purpose. She welcomed every guest with warmth and sincerity, remembering names, faces, even the smallest personal preferences. "Morning, Mr. Hanley," she'd say, handing over a fresh towel set. "Hope your meeting goes just the way you want it." Her team admired her, not because she barked orders from behind a desk, but because she rolled up her sleeves and worked right beside them. If phones rang off the hook, she jumped behind the front desk. If the housekeeping staff was down a person, she grabbed gloves and helped clean bathrooms. Isabel believed no task was beneath her if it made someone's day a little better. Even on her most hectic days, she always carved out a few minutes to stand in the cozy lobby and watch the world go by. Rain pattered against the big windows, people rushed under umbrellas, and somehow the quiet chaos outside calmed her. This town, she'd whisper to herself, watching the drizzle, might be soaked half the time, but it's got heart. This town, she'd whisper quietly to herself, might be sticky in the summer and sleepy in the winter, but it was bursting with soul. She loved it all. The uneven brick sidewalks, the creaking trolleys, the humid nights. Savannah wasn't perfect, but to Isabel, it was home. At the end of every long shift, when the last guest had checked in and the inn's old doors were locked for the night, Isabel stayed behind. She'd sit at the front desk, poring over spreadsheets and balancing accounts, determined to make sure everything was flawless. Her coworkers used to tease her about it. "Isabel, girl, you've got to learn to let go," her assistant manager, Tamara, would joke, nudging her playfully on the shoulder. "You're going to burn yourself out before you're 40. Isabel would just wave it off with a tired smile. "If it's not right, I won't sleep anyway," she'd reply with a shrug. That was just who she was. The kind of person who always showed up for others. The kind who gave up weekends and late nights if it meant the inn would shine and her team could thrive. But her world didn't revolve only around work. There was Derek, after all. She could still remember the first time they met. It was at a quiet little jazz bar downtown. She and Tamara had dropped by for a post-shift drink, the kind of thing they rarely did. And then, there he was. Derek had that magnetism, like the kind of man who didn't just enter a room, but owned it. Easygoing, self-assured, with a look in his eyes that made you feel like you were the only one who mattered. He caught her glance before she had time to look away. With a smirk, he strolled right over, his smile lighting up the shadows of the bar. "Mind if I sit?" he asked, motioning to the stool beside her. She flushed slightly, gave a quick nod. "Go ahead." From there, it was like the rest of the world faded. He talked about his grand plans, how he wanted to build a real estate legacy, something that people would remember long after he was gone. He shared his passion for architecture, for designing buildings that reached the sky. And Isabel? She was all in. "You're incredible," he'd told her that first night, eyes locked on hers. "You're not like anyone I've ever known." She had believed him. Why wouldn't she? Derek had a way of making her feel seen. Truly seen, in a way no one had in years. The weeks that followed moved like a whirlwind. Derek would swing by the inn to surprise her with flowers, whisk her off to rooftop bars where the air was thick with warm breeze and promises. One day, he'd whisper, fingers laced with hers as they looked out over the city skyline, "We're going to have it all. You and me." She could still hear him saying it, could still feel the warmth in his voice that night. Her friends and family mostly liked him too. But there were always those little hints. "Derek's charming, sure," her mom had said once, tilting her head thoughtfully, her voice soft but cautious. "But sweetheart, charm doesn't always mean truth." Her best friend Leah didn't bother sugarcoating it. "I don't know, she'd said bluntly, arms crossed as they sat on Isabel's front porch. "He talks big, but have you actually seen him finish anything? All these projects, where are they?" But Isabel had always waved it off. "He just needs time," she'd say, defending him with that familiar conviction in her voice. "It's hard making something out of nothing. He's trying. That's what counts, right?" And she truly believed it. Derek wasn't perfect, but then again, who was? They got married less than a year after they met. The wedding was small, tucked away in a quiet lakeside cottage upstate. Nothing extravagant, simple but beautiful. Isabel paid for most of it herself, and she didn't mind. Derek had promised her that this was just the beginning, that their dreams, their real life, was still on the horizon. She held on to that. Isabel gave everything she had to make their life together work. She threw herself deeper into her job at the inn, even more committed than before. Saving money became her new mission. Date nights turned into budget reviews. Weekends disappeared into spreadsheets and staff scheduling. When her friends invited her out for dinner or movie nights, she'd politely decline. "I'm trying to save," she'd say with a smile. "Next time, for sure." Most nights, she sat at the old dining table, her laptop casting a soft white glow over her tired face. She'd track every dollar with precision: rent, utilities, groceries. If she passed on a new dress or skipped her morning latte, it meant something. It was another brick laid in the foundation of the future she and Derek were supposed to build. A home, a family, stability. That image pushed her through the long hours. Derek, meanwhile, seemed to live for the now. "I need this," he'd tell her, lifting a tailored navy suit off its hanger. "It's how I'll seal the deal." Isabel would glance at the price tag, her stomach sinking a little. "You really think this will make a difference?" she'd ask, voice soft. "Absolutely," he'd say, that grin flashing again. The same one that had drawn her in all those months ago. "You've got to look the part to play the part, babe." And just like that, she'd let it go. Because Derek was trying too, wasn't he? He was always busy, on calls buried in his laptop, stepping out for one meeting or another. "It's all for us," he'd say, brushing her cheek with his hand. "You're the reason I'm doing this." She wanted to believe him. She needed to. After all, she wasn't just saving for herself anymore. She was saving for them. For their future. For love. And loving someone, she reminded herself, meant trusting them. Even when things weren't perfect. Isabel hadn't felt that kind of happiness in a long time. It had started on just another ordinary morning. The skies over Savannah were overcast, and the warm air hung heavy with the promise of rain. She woke up with a strange feeling, an odd mix of fatigue and queasiness that lingered, even after her usual strong cup of coffee. At first, she chalked it up to burnout. "Too many late nights," she murmured, poking at a piece of cold toast she never touched. But as the morning wore on, a thought crept in, quiet and impossible to shake. Later that day, with her heart pounding against her ribs, Isabel stopped by the pharmacy. She bought a pregnancy test and drove home in silence, her thoughts spinning. She didn't tell Derek. She couldn't explain why, even to herself. Maybe a part of her was afraid it wouldn't be true, or maybe she was afraid of how much she wanted it to be. And when the 2 pink lines appeared, she gasped, hand flying to her mouth, tears instantly flooding her eyes, disbelief, wonder, awe, all crashing over her in a single breath. That evening, when Derek walked through the door, Isabel could barely contain the news. She waited until after dinner. They were curled up on the couch when she handed him a small paper gift bag she'd tucked beneath the coffee table. "What's this?" he asked, arching a brow as he pulled it into his lap. "Just open it," she said, biting her lip, her hands trembling from excitement. Inside were a tiny pair of gray baby shoes and a simple handwritten note. "You're going to be a dad." Derek stared at it in silence, the whole room stilled, like the moment before a firework goes off. And then he looked at her. His face broke into a wide, honest smile. He whispered, setting the bag aside and pulling her into his arms. "We're going to be amazing parents, I promise." He was already talking about their next steps. "We'll find a bigger place," he said, his voice full of the same unstoppable confidence that had drawn her to him from the start. "Private school, college fund, everything. Our kid's going to have it all." And Isabel, she let herself get swept up in the dream. She could almost see it. The nursery, painted in soft pastels, tiny onesies folded into drawers, stuffed animals lined up on shelves like sentries. She pictured their baby's first steps, first laugh, first everything. For the first time in what felt like forever, she believed in their future again. Like the cracks that had once scared her were slowly sealing over. But the thing about cracks, they never really disappear. Not unless you fix them. And not looking doesn't make them go away. About a month later, it happened. They were sitting at the dining table after dinner, dishes still scattered between them. Isabel was absent-mindedly rubbing her small but growing belly when Derek cleared his throat. He looked serious, already showing just a little. Derek cleared his throat, shifting in his seat. Isabel looked up, sensing something was weighing on him. "I've been thinking," he said, leaning forward, resting his elbows on the table. "About the baby, about us." Isabel tilted her head, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "Okay, what about us?" Derek took a deep breath, the kind you take before saying something big. "I've got an opportunity," he began. "A business deal. It's huge. If it works out, we'll be set. No more budgeting, no more scraping by. We'd have everything we ever dreamed of. The big house, a college fund, all of it." Isabel blinked, caught off guard by the sudden intensity in his tone. "What kind of deal?" she asked, a frown starting to form. "It's a real estate investment," he said quickly, his words tumbling out like they'd been rehearsed in the mirror. "There's this development project going up near downtown. I've got it in, but I need capital. It's $60,000, but that's the buy-in for something life-changing." Isabel's stomach turned. $60,000. That was all of it, their entire savings, everything she had squirreled away over the years. She folded her hands slowly on the table. Her voice came out soft. "That's everything we've got, Derek." "I know," he said, reaching across the table and taking her hand in his. "But think about it. This isn't just for me, it's for us. For the baby. Don't you want to give them the life we always talked about? One where they don't have to struggle like we did?" Isabel stared at him, her thoughts swirling. She did want those things. Of course she did. But giving up their savings? That money represented years of hard work, careful planning, sacrifices. It was the foundation of the future she was trying so hard to build. "I don't know," she said hesitantly. "That's a lot of money. What if it doesn't work out?" "It will work out," he said with a firm nod, squeezing her hand tighter. "You trust me, don't you? I've never been more sure about anything. I wouldn't be asking you if I didn't believe in this." And the way he looked at her then, like she was the only thing that mattered, she felt her doubts begin to slip. His voice was steady, his eyes full of conviction. For a moment, she felt guilty for even hesitating. This was their family, their future. Maybe he was right. Maybe this really was the shot they'd been waiting for. Isabel's hand moved over the small bump on her stomach, her fingers brushing lightly against the curve. She began, then stopped. She looked into his eyes. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll do it. But Derek, this has to work." "It will," he said with a wide smile, pulling her into a hug. "You won't regret this, I promise." That night, Isabel sat at the kitchen table, logged into her bank account, and transferred the $60,000 to Derek. As Isabel clicked send, her hands trembled slightly. But she told herself it was just nerves. Everything was going to be fine. Derek wouldn't let her down, would he? It had been a week since the transfer, and even though she repeated it to herself like a mantra, I trust him, a strange uneasiness had begun to settle into her chest. It showed up in the quiet moments. When she sat at the kitchen table, staring at a half-eaten piece of toast. When she folded soft, freshly washed baby clothes, organizing them in neat little piles on the couch. "You're just overthinking," she muttered under her breath more than once. But Derek's behavior had shifted, and it was getting harder to ignore. He had always been talkative, always eager to share his ideas, his plans, but now he was distracted, distant. Whenever she asked how the deal was going, he'd wave her off. "It's all fine, babe," he'd say with a shrug. "Just a lot of moving parts right now." His tone was smooth, too smooth, but he never looked her in the eye when he said it, and that gnawed at her. One evening, Isabel was in the kitchen, chopping carrots for dinner. She heard the front door creak open. Derek walked in, hair messy, shirt untucked. He smiled at her, but it didn't touch his eyes. "Hey," he said, kissing her cheek quickly before heading straight to the bedroom. "Long day?" she asked, drying her hands on a dish towel as she followed him. "Yeah," he called back. "Back-to-back meetings. I'm beat." She stepped into the room just as he was pulling off his tie. That's when she noticed it, a faint scent in the air, not his usual musky cologne. This one was sweeter. Schnoi. Isabel paused in the doorway, a knot tightening in her stomach. "Is that a new cologne?" she asked, keeping her voice light. Derek froze just for a beat before tossing the tie onto the bed. No," he said quickly. "Probably someone at the office. You know how people drown themselves in perfume these days." He let out a laugh, but it sounded hollow. Isabel nodded, though something in her chest twisted tighter. "Yeah, I guess so," she murmured, turning back toward the kitchen. That night, as they ate dinner, Derek's phone buzzed several times where it sat on the table. Each time, he glanced at the screen, then flipped it face down again. Isabel watched, her fork paused over her plate. "Aren't you going to check that?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Nah," he said quickly, "it's just work stuff." "Work stuff? At 8 at night?" Derek looked up sharply. The tension in the room thickened. For a moment, Isabel regretted saying anything. "Work doesn't run on a 9-to-5 clock, he said, his tone clipped. "You'd know that if you worked in my world." The words stung. Isabel lowered her gaze to her plate. "Right," she whispered. "Sorry." She didn't even have to ask. The days that followed only deepened Isabel's growing suspicion. Derek was coming home later and later, always with vague excuses, last-minute calls, running over on meetings. His tone grew sharper whenever she asked about his schedule, so she started to tread lightly, careful not to press too hard, careful not to spark another argument. But the little things, they started stacking up. One afternoon, Isabel was folding laundry in the living room. She reached into the pocket of Derek's jacket and found a crumpled receipt. Curious, she smoothed it out. Her brow furrowed. It was from a high-end restaurant downtown, one she had never been to. The date? 2 nights ago. The same night he'd told her he was working late. Her heart sank. 2 entrees. 2 glasses of wine. She tried to talk herself down. Maybe it was business. Maybe it wasn't what it looked like. She wanted to believe there was some logical explanation. But deep down, she already knew better. That evening, she couldn't bring herself to confront him. Instead, she watched him closely as they sat on the couch. Derek was glued to his phone, scrolling through messages, his face unreadable. The screen lit up again, this time with a message from an unknown number. Isabel leaned slightly, instinctively trying to get a better look. Derek tilted the screen away and quickly silenced it. "Who was that?" she asked softly, her voice laced with quiet tension. "No one important," he said, not even glancing up. She bit her lip, her fingers digging into the edge of the couch. "Derek, is there something you're not telling me?" He finally looked at her. His expression shifted, hardening, defensive. "What's that supposed to mean?" Isabel hesitated, feeling the weight of her own words before they even left her mouth. "It's just, you've been so distant lately. The late nights, the messages, it doesn't feel like work anymore." Derek's jaw clenched. He stood suddenly, running a hand through his hair. "I can't believe this," he muttered, pacing the room. "I'm out there killing myself for us, and now you're accusing me?" "That's not what I—" "Save it, Isabel," he snapped, cutting her off. "I don't need this. Not now." He grabbed his jacket off the back of the chair and walked out the door without another word, leaving Isabel alone in the silence, her heart pounding, her vision blurring with tears. And as the days passed, the space between them only grew wider. tighter, heavier. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping away. Bed, Isabel couldn't ignore it any longer. The rain had been falling for hours, steady and soft, tapping gently against the windows in a rhythm that made the silence inside the house feel even heavier. The entire space was still, too still. She sat curled on the couch, a throw blanket wrapped around her shoulders, an unopened book resting on her lap. But her eyes weren't on the pages. They were far away. Her mind kept circling the same uneasy thoughts. Derek, his strange behavior, the rushed phone calls, the weak excuses that never quite made sense. She'd told herself again and again that she was overthinking, that it was just hormones playing tricks on her mind. That pregnancy made everything feel more intense. But no matter how many times she tried to rationalize it, that gnawing feeling in her chest wouldn't let go. Then the baby kicked, just lightly, snapping her out of her spiral. She placed a gentle hand on her belly and drew in a shaky breath. "It's okay," she whispered. "Everything's fine." But the words felt hollow. Her eyes drifted to the corner of the room, where Derek's desk sat buried under piles of paper. Disorganized, cluttered, a chaotic mess he hadn't bothered to touch in weeks. Isabel's gaze lingered there. She bit her lip. Derek had always been guarded about his work. Anytime she asked too many questions, he dodged them with smooth deflections. But tonight, the weight of not knowing felt unbearable. She rose slowly, the hardwood floor cool beneath her bare feet as she walked toward the desk. "Just the bills," she told herself. "I'm just straightening the bills." Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened the first drawer. Receipts, sticky notes, random bits of paperwork. Nothing unusual. She moved to the next one, her heart beat faster with every passing second. And then, there it was. At first it was subtle, a high-end floral invoice. In neat, stylized script, the names Derek Whitmore and Kayla Bennett. She froze. The paper crinkled slightly in her hand. Kayla? Who was Kayla? Maybe it was business, a corporate event, something work-related. She tried to reason with herself, but then her eyes landed on another paper. A catering contract. Same names, printed clearly at the top. Derek Whitmore and Kayla Bennett. Isabel's breath caught. Her hands shook now as she frantically rifled through the drawer, scattering papers across the desk. In the very back, tucked beneath a stack of loose forms, she found it. A wedding invitation. She stared at it, stunned. The ornate gold foil shimmered faintly under the dim light. The elegant lettering felt like a punch to the chest, shimmering faintly under the soft glow of the desk lamp. The edges of the invitation were delicate. The gold lettering, elegant, sharp, and devastating. Isabel's eyes moved across the words, each one hitting like a stone dropped in still water. "Join us to celebrate the union of Derek Whitmore and Kayla Bennett." Her knees gave out. She dropped into the chair beside the desk, the invitation still clutched in her trembling hands. 2 weeks. The wedding was in 2 weeks. The date stared back at her, mocking her. As if the universe had orchestrated this perfectly cruel moment, just to twist the knife deeper. Outside, the rain intensified, the wind howling softly against the windows. It was as if the storm inside her had summoned the one outside. Tears streamed down Isabel's cheeks as she stared at the invitation. Her mind was a whirlwind. Derek's late nights, the unfamiliar perfume, the vague answers, the calls he always took out of the room. "How could you do this?" she whispered into the empty room, her voice cracking under the weight of betrayal. "How could you lie to me? To us?" She thought of the money, $60,000 she'd handed over to him, her trust, her sacrifice, wrapped in the lie of a business deal. She thought of the baby, growing inside her, of the quiet moments she'd imagined their future. A nursery filled with soft colors, tiny feet on hardwood floors, giggles echoing through a home built on dreams. It had all been a lie. Isabel wiped her face with the back of her hand, the invitation still trembling in the other. The betrayal pressed against her chest, heavy and suffocating. Her eyes drifted to her phone, lying face up on the nightstand. The glow of the screen illuminated the edge of the invitation, the gold foil script dancing mockingly in the light. Her hands shook as she picked it up. She didn't want to do it. She didn't want confirmation of what her gut already screamed, but she couldn't pretend anymore. Not after this. Taking a shaky breath, she pulled up the number printed on the back of the invitation. Her thumb hovered over the green call button, frozen. "Please let this be a mistake," she whispered to herself. "Please." She pressed it. The phone rang. Each tone pulled her closer to the truth, closer to something she couldn't take back. Finally, a voice answered, bright, polished, and professional. Good evening. Thank you for calling Magnolia Grove Estate. How can I help you today? Isabel froze, her mind racing. She swallowed hard, willing her voice to stay steady. My name's Julia. I'm calling on behalf of Kayla Bennett. I'm her assistant, and just needed to confirm a few last-minute details for her upcoming wedding. There was a short pause on the other end. The reception? The woman sounded slightly uncertain. Oh, sure, but could you verify your role again? We've mostly been working directly with Mr. Whitmore for the planning. Isabel's breath caught. Her chest tightened. Yes, of course, Isabel said quickly, forcing her tone to stay even. I'm just helping Kayla with a few last-minute things. She glanced at the invitation still in her lap, her fingers brushing over the gold lettering as she rattled off the details printed on the card. It's on the 15th, right? At Magnolia Grove Estate? The receptionist seemed to ease, the slight tension leaving her voice. Yes, that's correct. Everything is all set for the 15th. It's going to be a beautiful day. We've got all the arrangements confirmed. Isabel's grip around the phone tightened, her knuckles turning white. She could barely breathe, but somehow she kept her voice steady. Great. Could you remind me what's been confirmed? Just want to make sure Kayla has everything she needs. The receptionist gave a light, almost cheerful laugh. Oh, don't worry. Mr. Whitmore has been very thorough. He's made sure everything is perfect for Kayla. The flowers, the catering, the music, it's all been taken care of. He's really been such a gentleman. Isabel's stomach turned. The words hit her like acid, bitter and impossible to swallow. Her throat burned as bile rose. Hang up, her mind begged. Don't listen to this. Stop hurting yourself. But she couldn't stop. And, the payment? She asked, barely above a whisper. All sorted, too. The woman replied casually. I believe Mr. Whitmore used his business account for the initial deposit. It was very generous. He made sure there wouldn't be any issues. Isabel's vision blurred. Tears welled up in her eyes and slipped down her cheeks before she could even wipe them away. She reached for the nightstand to steady herself, the edge digging into her palm as she pressed the phone harder to her ear. The room seemed to tilt around her. Everything was spinning. The receptionist's words swirled in her mind. Generous, perfect for Kayla, very thorough. Right, Isabel said weakly, her voice cracking. Of course. Thank you so much for your help. Oh, no problem at all, the receptionist chirped. And please tell Kayla we're looking forward to hosting her big day. Isabel didn't respond. She just ended the call, letting the phone slip from her fingers. It landed with a soft thud on the bed beside her. She sat frozen on the edge of the mattress, her arms wrapped around her stomach as her chest rose and fell in uneven gasps. Her thoughts scattered, eyes unfocused, as the weight of what she had just heard anchored itself inside her. Derek had used her money. Their money. He had lied to her. Taken everything she had worked for, and spent it on a wedding. A wedding with someone else. The phone lay discarded beside her, its screen now dark, but the receptionist's words echoed in Isabel's head like a cruel whisper she couldn't silence. Mr. Whitmore made sure everything was perfect for Kayla. He's been such a gentleman. Her legs buckled again as she tried to stand. The room spun. Before she knew it, she was back on the floor, her arms wrapped tightly around her belly. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was instinct. Primal. As if shielding her unborn child could somehow protect them both from the truth that had come crashing down like a wave. Tears streamed down her face, hot and relentless, dripping onto the soft fabric of her maternity dress. She rocked slightly, back and forth, a quiet rhythm of devastation as memories of Derek's promises poured through her mind like poison. You're my world, Eyes. I'm doing this for us. For the baby. We're going to be amazing parents. Just you wait. Trust me. This is for our future. Each word he had spoken to her felt like a dagger now, twisting deeper with every breath. How could he? How could someone lie so convincingly? Look her in the eye every single day and still live a secret life behind her back? She thought of all the moments she'd doubted her instincts. Every time something had felt off, she'd told herself she was imagining things, that she was hormonal, that Derek deserved her trust. But he didn't. Not then. Not now. Her fingers clutched at the fabric of her dress, gripping tightly until her arms ached. She tilted her head back, letting out a shaky breath that cracked into a broken sob. The baby moved inside her, a soft, gentle shift. It grounded her, because this wasn't just about her anymore. It wasn't just her pain. She wasn't only grieving the relationship she thought she had. She was grieving the family she believed they were building together. Minutes passed. Maybe longer. She wasn't sure. Eventually, the tears slowed. Her breathing steadied, though the ache in her chest still pulsed like an open wound. With trembling hands, she wiped her damp cheeks. Then her eyes drifted back to the desk, scattered papers, printed contracts, the wedding invitation with its elegant damning script. It all sat there like evidence in a courtroom, demanding a verdict. What now? The question clung to her. The idea of confronting Derek flashed through her mind, of throwing the evidence in his face, demanding answers, screaming the truth until he couldn't hide behind his lies. But what would he do? Deny it? Twist it? Gaslight her into thinking she was the unstable one? Her eyes settled on the invitation once more, its gold lettering catching the soft glow from the desk lamp. 2 weeks. The wedding was in 2 weeks. If Isabel waited until then, if she showed up uninvited, right there in front of Derek, Kayla, their guests, their families, there would be no running from it. No way for him to spin another lie. No way to twist the truth. Everyone would see it. All of it. Her stomach twisted at the thought. Was she really the kind of woman who could do that? Could she walk into a room full of strangers, shatter the illusion and expose the man she once loved? Watch everything burn to the ground in front of them all? She didn't want to be that person. She had always been the one who held things together. The woman who stayed quiet, who endured the pain so others wouldn't have to. The steady one, the strong one. But this was different. This was too much. Isabel pushed herself up from the floor, her legs trembling beneath her, but her resolve was solidifying. She needed proof. All of it. If she was going to do this, if she was going to walk into that wedding and tell the truth, she had to be ready. She started with their marriage certificate, carefully pulling it from the filing cabinet tucked in the corner of the room. The paper felt heavier than she remembered. Every word printed on it a reminder of the vows Derek had broken. She placed it on the desk next to the invitation. Next, she logged into her bank account. Her hands shook as she navigated through the transaction history. There it was, the $60,000 transfer. It stared back at her like a scar she couldn't cover. She printed it, added it to the growing pile on the desk. Then she hesitated. Her hand hovered over the drawer where she kept her personal keepsakes. Slowly, she pulled it open. Inside, a small stack of ultrasound photos sat on top, neat and untouched. She picked them up gently, staring down at the blurry images of the life growing inside her. A quiet ache tugged at her chest. Then, just beneath the photos, she saw it, a folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges. She unfolded it slowly. It was a letter. One Derek had written to her years ago when they were still in the early days. When it all felt real, when she believed every word. Her grip tightened around the page as fresh tears welled up again. She let out a bitter laugh, a sound sharp and hollow in the quiet room. How could someone write words like these, and still turn around and destroy everything they claimed to love? Isabel laid the letter on the desk, next to the marriage certificate, the bank statement, the invitation, the receipts. Evidence. Each piece a testament to Derek's betrayal, a trail of paper that told the truth better than he ever had. By the time she was done, the desk was no longer just a surface, it was an exhibit, a case, a reckoning waiting to happen. She folded the papers carefully into a plain manila folder, her hands steady despite the emotional storm churning inside her. Whatever happened next, Isabel would be ready. She owed that much to herself, and to the child growing inside her. The day finally arrived. Isabel's fingers gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles bone-white as she drove through the rain-slicked streets of Savannah. The windshield wipers squeaked rhythmically, barely keeping up with the drizzle. Her heart thundered in her chest, so loud she could hear it in her ears. Her stomach flipped and twisted, a sickening cocktail of nausea and dread. The folder of evidence sat on the passenger seat like a co-pilot, silent but heavy. It was everything: proof, betrayal, truth, a reckoning waiting to unfold. As she approached the highway, her phone buzzed on the console. She glanced down. Derek. His name lit up the screen. Her breath hitched. For a split second, she considered letting it ring, letting it go to voicemail. But the sound, each tone, felt like a hammer driving into her chest. She couldn't risk raising suspicion. With trembling fingers, she swiped to answer. "Hey," she said, trying to sound normal, though her voice cracked slightly. "Hey, babe." Derek replied, his tone smooth. Too smooth. Casual. Like nothing was wrong in the world. "Where are you? You've been gone a while." Isabel gritted her teeth. The calmness in his voice sparked a slow-burning fire in her chest. "Just running some errands," she replied, steadying her tone. "Needed a few things for the baby." "All right," he said with a soft chuckle. "You're getting close now, huh? Not long until we're parents. Can you believe it?" Her grip on the wheel tightened, her nails digging into the leather. The audacity of it. Talking about their child as if he wasn't preparing to marry someone else. As if he hadn't gutted everything they'd built with a smile on his face. She swallowed hard. "Yeah," she said, her voice quiet, almost distant. "Not long now." "Well, I'll see you tonight," he said cheerfully. "Got a couple things to take care of first, but we'll talk more then." "Sure," she replied. Her voice came out sharper than she meant it to. "Love you," Derek added. His words were razors, polished, practiced, slicing straight through her. Isabel stared at the road ahead. For a brief moment, she thought about saying it back. Thought about letting herself pretend, just for a second longer. But her lips wouldn't move. She hung up without replying. The phone dropped back onto the console with a dull clack. Her hands were shaking. The call left her raw, emotionally unspooled, her thoughts spiraling. Grief clawed at her, sinking in, but it was soon overtaken by something hotter, sharper. Anger. She replayed his voice in her head. His calmness. His easy laughter. The lies, so smooth they almost sounded like love. Even now, he was convincing. Even now. The betrayal burned in her veins, and yet, beneath the rage, there was doubt. A sliver of hesitation burrowed deep in her chest. Was she really ready to do this? To walk into his perfect day? To look him in the eye and tear it all down in front of everyone? Her fingers drifted to her belly, gently brushing over the curve, seeking reassurance, seeking strength. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. If I don't do this now, he'll keep getting away with it. Isabel whispered the words to herself, her voice trembling. For my child's sake, I can't let that happen. By the time she reached the venue, the rain had softened into a gentle drizzle. The gray skies cast a muted glow over the sprawling property of Magnolia Grove Estate. She pulled into a spot near the edge of the lot and let the engine hum for a few moments, trying to catch her breath. She looked at the folder on the passenger seat, her chest tightening, her jaw clenched. Her resolve hardened. "You can do this," she murmured, though her voice was barely more than a breath. When she stepped out of the car, the grandeur of the venue hit her like a wave. Towering floral arrangements lined the entrance, their colors lush and vibrant, almost blinding. She paused for a moment, her eyes lingering on the cascading orchids, the peonies, the roses in full bloom. A bitter thought surfaced. She paid for those flowers. The pit in her stomach grew as she made her way toward the main hall. Through the tall windows, she could see the guests inside, laughing, chatting, drinks in hand. Their joy drifted through the damp air like a song she didn't belong to. The scene was warm, welcoming. To anyone else, it would have looked like a dream. But to Isabel, it felt suffocating. Every smiling face, every soft chuckle, every clink of champagne glasses, all of it was a sharp, mocking contrast to the storm raging inside her. She stood just outside the grand double doors of the wedding hall. Her heart pounded so hard, she could feel it in her throat. The scent of roses and expensive perfume hung heavy in the air, curling around her like a noose. Her stomach turned. Inside, the decor was breathtaking. Opulent chandeliers, rows of flawless table settings, and an elaborate white and gold cake standing tall at the center of the room. It hit her like a slap. All those nights she skipped dinners with friends. All those moments she chose secondhand over new. Every single sacrifice she made to save. And this is where it had gone. Inside, the music shifted to something soft, ceremonial. She heard the officiant begin to speak. It was starting. Her pulse quickened as she pressed herself against the wall, peering through the narrow crack between the doors. The guests were seated, smiling, beaming. Their attention focused on the altar, and there he was, Derek, standing hand in hand with Kayla. He looked perfect, sharp in a tailored suit, calm, composed, confident. He had no idea. No idea that just feet away, the woman he betrayed was standing ready to blow his lies wide open. Isabel's hands trembled as she adjusted her grip on the folder. Not yet, she whispered to herself. Wait. It had to be the right moment. Not too early, not too late. Then the officiant's voice echoed through the hall. Do you, Derek Whitmore, take Kayla Bennett to be your lawfully wedded wife, to love and to cherish, in sickness and in health, for as long as you both shall live? Isabel's chest clenched. Her breath caught in her throat. Her feet moved before her mind caught up, propelling her forward. The grand doors burst open with a sharp thud, echoing through the hall like a gunshot. Stop this wedding, she shouted, her voice slicing through the air like a blade. The music screeched to a halt. Every head turned. Gasps rippled through the crowd like shock waves. Whispers erupted. Eyes darted. Confusion. Panic. And at the altar, Derek's smile vanished. His confident, practiced composure cracked as his gaze locked on her. He took a shaky step back, his hand slipping from Kayla's. Isabel? He choked out, his voice barely cutting through the rising murmurs. Kayla stood frozen beside him, her face drained of color, her eyes wild, bouncing between Derek and the furious woman storming down the aisle. Isabel didn't slow. She kept walking, determined, steady. Her eyes never left Derek's. She stopped just feet from them, the room holding its breath. Her shoulders squared, her jaw set, her voice like steel wrapped in grief. You forgot to invite your wife, she said coldly. A stunned silence followed. Then, a collective gasp. Isabel reached into the folder and pulled out the marriage certificate, holding it high for everyone to see. The paper trembled slightly in her hand, but her voice was unwavering now. That's right, she said louder. We're still married. She turned toward the guests, letting the truth soak in. So, Derek, care to explain how you're standing here, about to marry someone else? Derek's mouth opened, then shut. Opened again. Like a man drowning, grasping for breath. He took a step forward, reaching toward her. Let's just talk about this, he stammered. Talk about what? She snapped, her voice cracking but growing stronger with every word. This wedding? This celebration? She turned, gesturing toward the room, toward the chandeliers, the massive floral arrangements, the towering cake, the 100 curated details that had once existed only in her dreams. This, all of this, was paid for with my money. The guests gasped again. Kayla's hand went to her mouth. $60,000, Isabel continued. That's what I gave him for our family, for our future. Her voice shook now, but not from fear, from fury. I skipped dinners, I skipped everything. I worked overtime, sacrificed weekends, lived frugally, for this. Her hand swept over the luxury surrounding them. The flowers? Mine. The cake? Mine. The band, the food, the rented fairy tale? Mine. Derek's jaw clenched, a bead of sweat rolled down his temple. That's not true, he said, his voice rising. She's exaggerating. I'm exaggerating, Isabel barked. You lied to me. You used me. You built this wedding on my back, on our baby's back. Gasps turned to murmurs. Whispers became outrage. Stop, Isabel, please. Derek began again, his voice cracking now. But she wasn't done. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she reached into the folder again, her hands trembling but not weak. She pulled out the ultrasound photo. Isabel held up the ultrasound photo, her hands trembling as she stepped closer to Derek and Kayla. Her gaze shifted to Kayla, steady, heavy, full of pain. Did he tell you about this? She asked, her voice soft but sharpened with grief. Did he tell you that while he was planning this wedding with you, I was at home, carrying his child? Her voice cracked, but she didn't falter. Did he tell you about the nights I sat alone, dreaming about the family we were supposed to have? Did he tell you any of that? Kayla's eyes widened as they locked onto the ultrasound. Her hand flew to her mouth. No, she whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. He didn't tell me anything about that. Isabel turned back to Derek, her voice rose now, trembling with righteous fury. You promised me, Derek, a future, a family, a life. And this? She gestured around the room. This is what you've been doing? Lying to me, to her, to everyone? Derek's composure collapsed. Gone was the smooth, charming mask. He looked around the room in panic, sweat beading along his hairline. His eyes darted from Kayla to Isabel to the stunned crowd witnessing the wreckage of his lies. I can explain, he stammered. This isn't what it looks like. She's just trying to ruin everything. Kayla's voice cut through the room like glass. She turned on him, hands clenched at her sides, her face a mask of fury and betrayal. What is she talking about, Derek? Is it true? Are you married? Does she really have your child? Derek flailed, reaching for excuses. It's complicated, he said weakly. I was going to tell you. When? Kayla snapped, tears brimming in her eyes. Before or after we said our vows? I believed you, she choked, her voice breaking as the pain poured out. I trusted you. You're a liar, a cheat. I can't believe I fell for this. The room was silent now, a church of exposed truth and broken trust. Isabel stood there, letting it all unfold, watching Derek crack under the weight of his own destruction. The fire in her chest still burned, but for the first time she felt something else. Relief. It was done. The truth was out, and there was no going back. Derek looked at her then, pale, desperate. Isabel, please, this isn't the place, he said, stepping forward cautiously, voice shaky. Let's go somewhere private. We can talk about this. You're blowing everything out of proportion. Isabel didn't move. Her jaw tightened, her eyes burned. She didn't need to say a word, because the altar was no longer a symbol of love. It was a stage of exposed lies. And the truth? It spoke louder than she ever could. Before Derek could say another word, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the hall, sharp and deliberate, cutting through the thick tension like a blade. The grand double doors at the back of the room burst open with a loud bang. 2 uniformed police officers strode in, their presence commanding immediate attention. Gasps rippled through the stunned crowd. Heads turned. Guests craned their necks to see what was happening. The lead officer stopped near the aisle, his voice calm but firm. Derek Whitmore? Derek froze. His head snapped toward them. Yes, he stammered, his voice barely audible. The officer stepped forward, tone unwavering. You are under arrest for fraud and bigamy. The room exploded. Guests gasped, whispers surged, chairs scraped. A tidal wave of shock rolled through the once celebratory crowd. Kayla staggered backward, her hand covering her mouth, her face pale with disbelief. Derek's eyes widened in pure panic. Wait, no, there's been a mistake, he shouted, voice cracking under the weight of the moment. I didn't do anything wrong. He turned toward the officers, hands raised, desperate. This is a misunderstanding. I can explain. Just listen to me. But the officers didn't hesitate. The lead officer reached for his belt, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. Sir, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. Step forward. Derek's gaze darted across the room, from the stone-faced officers to the shocked guests, to Kayla, and finally to Isabel. His breathing quickened. Panic swelled. No, you don't understand. I was just... He suddenly spun on his heel, bolting toward the side door. But he didn't make it far. The second officer moved fast, grabbing him by the arm, twisting it behind his back in one swift motion, and slamming him against a nearby column. Let me go, Derek shouted, his voice cracking as he struggled. You don't know what you're doing. I didn't do anything wrong. Handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists. Isabel stood still, watching. The man she once believed in. The man who promised her a future. A family, now restrained, exposed. She felt a strange swirl of emotions, relief, anger, and an aching, hollow sadness. She had loved him once. But that man, the one being dragged away in handcuffs, was no longer real. Kayla stood frozen, mascara-streaked tears sliding down her cheeks as she stared at Derek. The betrayal, the collapse, it was written all over her. Then suddenly, something snapped inside her. You used me, she screamed, her voice shaking with rage. You used me, Kayla spat, her voice shaking with fury. You used all of us. She stepped forward, tears streaming, her hands trembling as she yanked the engagement ring from her finger. You lied to me. To her, to everyone in this room. Derek didn't speak. Couldn't. The officers were already leading him toward the exit, his desperate protests dissolving into background noise. I hope you rot for this, Kayla hissed, her voice cutting through the silence like glass. Then, with one sharp flick of her wrist, she threw the ring. It bounced across the marble floor with a metallic clink and landed at Derek's feet. He flinched, shoulders slumping, his face collapsing into something almost unrecognizable. Defeated, there was no getting out of it now. Not with handcuffs on, not with the truth unraveling around him like smoke. As the officers reached the doors, Derek looked back over his shoulder, his eyes locking onto Isabel one final time. But she didn't flinch. There was no sympathy in her expression, no softness, no forgiveness, only truth. The officers led him out of the hall, and then the silence broke. A wave of murmurs swept through the crowd, whispers, gasps. Some guests covered their mouths, others leaned into each other, stunned, like they were trying to process the wreckage in real time. Kayla stood frozen, her chest heaving, her fists clenched at her sides. Then she turned. Her tear-streaked face softened, just slightly, as she looked at Isabel. Neither woman said a word. They just stood there, facing one another in the middle of the wreckage, the air between them thick with pain, betrayal, and something else, understanding. Kayla's lips parted, like she wanted to speak, but no words came. Instead, she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent gesture of respect, of solidarity. Isabel returned it, her face unreadable, but her eyes steady and full of quiet strength. They had both been deceived, they had both been used, but they had survived. The once perfect wedding venue, so recently filled with music, champagne, and curated joy, now buzzed with shock and disbelief. Guests gathered in huddled clusters. "I can't believe it," one woman whispered, shaking her head. "He seemed so charming," another added, her voice sharp with disbelief. "Charming? Please," a man muttered darkly. "More like a con artist." "Did you hear what she said?" A younger guest leaned in, voice low and incredulous. "He stole 60 grand from her and used it to pay for all this." He gestured around the room. The chandeliers, the flowers, the towering cake that now seemed obscene. Near the front, Kayla's parents stood like statues, their expressions locked in disbelief. Her mother's hand trembled around the pearls at her neck, her voice low and bitter as she turned to her husband. "You said he was perfect for her." Kayla's mother hissed, her voice trembling. "You said he was a good man." Her husband, red-faced and rattled, snapped back. "How was I supposed to know? He fooled all of us." Near the back of the room, Isabel stood quietly, her chest rising and falling as she tried to catch her breath. She watched as the officers led Derek out through the grand doors, the man she once thought she knew, now just a stranger in handcuffs. Her heart ached, not for him, but for everything she had lost. Everything she had believed in. Everything that would never be the same. A man in plain clothes approached her, his presence calm but unmistakable. A detective. He had been standing off to the side, observing everything, silent until now. "Isabel Whitmore?" he asked gently. She nodded, her voice barely holding. "Yes." He glanced toward the doors where Derek had just vanished, then back at her. His voice dropped low, quiet enough that only she could hear. "You did the right thing." Isabel blinked, startled. The detective continued. "This isn't the first time he's done something like this. We've been tracking him for a while. He'll be facing charges from multiple victims." A strange feeling washed over her, a mix of relief and grief, vindication and sadness. She paused, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I just wanted the truth to come out." The detective gave her a kind nod. "Well, it did. And because of you, he won't hurt anyone else." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the buzz of the room. Isabel let out a shaky breath. Her hands moved instinctively to rest on her belly. The baby shifted slightly, as if reminding her, "You're not alone." She looked around the hall. Guests were still murmuring, shaken. Kayla was surrounded by her family, head bowed, tear-streaked and silent. It was all a mess, a once beautiful illusion, now shattered. Outside, the rain had returned. A soft drizzle streaked down the tall windows like the sky itself was mourning. Isabel walked slowly toward the exit. She paused at the threshold. The cool air hit her skin. Raindrops kissed her cheeks, mixing with the tears she hadn't realized were still falling. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and felt something she hadn't felt in weeks: hope. It was faint, gentle, but real. With slow, steady steps, Isabel walked to her car. She opened the door, placed one hand on her belly, and whispered, "We're going to be okay." And for the first time, she believed it. Cameras clicked, pens scratched across notepads. The buzz of quiet anticipation filled the courtroom, thick with tension. At the center of it all sat Derek. His suit was flawless, tailored to perfection. Not a wrinkle in sight. He sat tall, back straight, as if he still controlled the room. He leaned in toward his attorney, whispering something with a smug half-smile curling at the corners of his mouth. Every so often, he glanced around casually, like this was just another deal he could charm his way out of. A show, a performance. And he believed he was still the star. Across the room, Isabel sat at the witness stand. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, knuckles pale. The low hum of murmured conversation felt distant, like it belonged to a different world. She focused on the papers in front of her, on her breath, on her heartbeat, pounding in her ears. Then her name was called. She stood slowly. She could feel every eye in the courtroom lock onto her. The press, the jury, the judge, the man who betrayed her, all of them. Her knees trembled slightly, but she squared her shoulders, lifted her chin, and took her place. The prosecutor approached, calm, poised, steady. "Mrs. Whitmore," he began, "could you please state your name for the record?" "Isabel Whitmore," she said softly. Her voice trembled. She paused, cleared her throat. "Isabel Whitmore," she repeated, stronger this time. The prosecutor gave her a small, encouraging nod. "Thank you. Now, Mrs. Whitmore, can you describe your relationship with the defendant, Derek Whitmore?" Her eyes flicked toward Derek, who now leaned back in his chair, arms folded as if none of this mattered, as if she was just another obstacle to maneuver around. Her stomach turned. But she turned away from him, back to the prosecutor. "He's my husband," she said, her voice steady now. Or, at least, he was. A ripple moved through the courtroom, soft whispers, raised brows. The prosecutor stepped closer. "And can you tell us about the events that led to this case?" Isabel drew in a breath. "Derek convinced me to give him $60,000, she began, voice unwavering. "He told me it was for a business deal, that it would secure our future, mine, his, and our babies." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. In the gallery, a few faces softened. Still, she pressed on. "I trusted him. I believed every word. I transferred the money willingly because I thought we were building a life together." She paused. The memory returned, the moment she found the invitation. That gold-embossed lie. "But then," she continued, "I found out it wasn't for a business deal." Her throat tightened, but she didn't stop. "He was using the money to pay for a wedding, his wedding, to someone else." Another wave of gasps moved through the gallery. The prosecutor nodded, stepping back with quiet approval. "No further questions, Your Honor." Isabel began to rise. But before she could take a step, Derek's attorney stood sharply, his tone slick and rehearsed. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, a faint smirk on his lips, "if I may."
Isabel sat back down, her chest tightening as she braced herself for what was coming. "Mrs. Whitmore," Derek's attorney began, pacing slowly in front of her like a predator sizing up its prey, "you've just described in great detail how you willingly gave my client $60,000. Is that correct?" "Yes," Isabel said. Her voice was steady, measured. "So just to clarify for the court," the lawyer continued, his tone oily, deliberate, "this money wasn't stolen. It wasn't taken by force. It was a gift. You transferred it into his account voluntarily. Isn't that right?" Isabel hesitated, just for a second. She could already feel how he was twisting it. "I gave him the money," she said slowly, "because he said it was for us, for our family." The lawyer nodded, that smug smile beginning to creep in. "Ah, but you didn't sign a contract, did you? There's no legal document stating how this money was to be used?" "No," Isabel admitted, her voice dropping slightly. "And my client didn't force you to transfer the money, did he?" "No," she said again, the heat rising in her cheeks. The lawyer turned to the jury now, arms spreading dramatically. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we have here is not a case of fraud. It's a case of regret." He let the words hang in the air, pacing with a theatrical calm. "Mrs. Whitmore willingly gave this money to my client, and now, because their relationship didn't work out, she's trying to paint him as a criminal." Isabel's hands curled into fists, her nails pressing into her palms. She could feel her breath quicken. "That's not true," she said, her voice trembling but strong. The lawyer didn't flinch, didn't even look at her. "She's bitter. Plain and simple," he continued, turning back to the jury. "She's trying to destroy my client's life because she couldn't let go when he moved on." "Objection." The prosecutor cut in sharply. "Withdrawn," the defense lawyer replied coolly, already turning back to Isabel. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "do you have any concrete proof that my client never intended to use the money for your future?" Isabel opened her mouth, but no words came. No text messages, no emails, no contract, just receipts, timelines, betrayal, and a golden invitation to a wedding she was never meant to see. The lawyer smirked, exactly the silence he was hoping for. "No further questions, Your Honor," he said, his voice lined with smug satisfaction. Isabel sat there, her heart racing, her face flushed with a mix of shame and fury. She looked down, hands trembling in her lap. Then she glanced toward the prosecutor. He gave her a quiet nod. Reassuring, steady. She had told the truth, and that was all she could do. As Isabel stepped down from the stand, she caught Derek's eye. He didn't look smug anymore, or confident. He looked worried, and somehow that was enough. Enough to remind her she had already taken her power back. She wasn't done fighting, not yet. The courtroom buzzed with quiet anticipation as the next witness was called. The prosecutor approached the stand, voice firm but even. "Please state your name for the court." The man cleared his throat, shifting slightly in the seat. "James Hart." "And how do you know the defendant, Mr. Hart?" James let out a bitter chuckle. His eyes flicked over to Derek, who now sat stiff and tense, his jaw clenched tight. "We used to be friends," James said, his voice rough with resentment. "Business partners, too, or so I thought." The courtroom hushed. "Derek and I started a real estate project together a few years ago. He told me it was a guaranteed win, said we'd be rich. I believed him." He paused, his voice thickened. "I put everything into it, my savings, my time, my trust." The prosecutor leaned in. "And what happened?" "There was no project," James said bluntly. "No deal. He took my money and vanished." A wave of murmurs rippled through the courtroom. The prosecutor raised a hand, calming the noise. "And did you confront Mr. Whitmore about this?" "I tried," James said, his eyes narrowing as he stared across the room. "But by the time I figured it out, he was gone, changed his number, moved. I never saw him again, until now." He gestured toward Derek, bitterness carved into every word. Derek's lawyer shot to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. This testimony is irrelevant and highly prejudicial." The judge didn't flinch. "Overruled. Continue, Mr. Hart." James nodded, his hands gripping the sides of the witness stand. "I just want to say, this isn't the first time he's done this. He's been running this same scam for years." A beat passed. His voice dropped to a raw final note. "Trust me, I learned the hard way." As he stepped down, he locked eyes with Derek, just once, before returning to his seat. Derek's face had gone red. His composure cracked further with every second. He wasn't in control anymore. The prosecutor called the next witness. A woman in her 30s walked to the stand, sharp and composed, but her body language radiated a quiet frustration beneath her professionalism. "Please state your name for the court," the prosecutor asked. "Laura Bennett." "And what is your connection to the defendant?" Laura adjusted her glasses, her jaw set. "I was the planner for his wedding." She glanced toward Derek, then at Isabel, with a brief flicker of sympathy in her eyes. "He hired me to manage everything. The flowers, the venue, the food. Said money was no issue. Paid everything up front." "And did Mr. Whitmore ever mention he was married?" Laura snorted softly. "Absolutely not. He said he was single. Told me he was marrying the love of his life. Said he wanted it to be perfect." She paused. "If I had known what was really going on." "If I had known what was really going on," Laura said, her voice clipped, "I would have refused to work with him." The prosecutor nodded. "And to your knowledge, how did Mr. Whitmore present himself to the vendors?" "Like some big-shot entrepreneur," she said with a shrug. "Single, wealthy, generous. He charmed everyone, made us all believe he was someone important. But now—" She trailed off, shaking her head again. Derek's lawyer stood abruptly. "Objection, Your Honor. Speculation." The judge gave a nod. "Sustained. Stick to the facts, Miss Bennett." "Of course," Laura replied, then stepped down, her heels clicking across the floor. The weight of her words lingered as she returned to her seat. The courtroom was quiet again, tense. Derek fidgeted, his fingers twitching against the defense table. His once confident smirk had completely disappeared. When closing arguments were made, the room held its collective breath. All eyes turned to the judge, who straightened her posture, her voice firm and unwavering as it cut through the silence. "Derek Whitmore," she began, "your actions were calculated, cruel. You preyed on the trust of those who believed in you. You exploited their hopes, their dreams, their futures, for your own personal gain." Isabel sat on the edge of her seat, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. "This court," the judge continued, "will not tolerate such deceit." Derek's face turned ashen. He gripped the edge of the table, his jaw locked as if bracing for a blow. "You are hereby sentenced to 7 years in prison for fraud," the judge said, her tone sharp. and ordered to repay Mrs. Isabel Whitmore the full $60,000 you stole from her. Additionally, restitution will be made to your other victims pending further investigation. Derek shot to his feet. Your Honor, please, this is a misunderstanding, he cried, his voice cracking. I didn't mean. Enough, Mr. Whitmore, the judge cut in, her tone final. You've had your chance to speak. As the bailiffs approached, Derek's desperation grew louder, more frantic. This isn't fair. I was just trying to build a life. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. The courtroom stayed silent. Then, click. The sound of the handcuffs echoed through the space. His eyes darted around the room, finally landing on Isabel. Isabel, please. His voice broke. You know me. You know I didn't mean this. Help me. Please. She met his gaze, steady, calm, unyielding. I thought I knew you, she said softly. But I was wrong. His shoulders sagged. The last of his bravado shattered. The bailiffs turned him toward the back doors, and with one final push they led him out of the courtroom. As the door slammed shut behind him, the room exhaled, a collective breath of release. It was over. The tension finally broke as Isabel stepped out of the courthouse. The sunlight streaming through the tall glass doors felt warm against her skin, a sharp contrast to the storm she had just walked through. We're going to be okay now, she whispered. Her voice, though quiet, carried the kind of strength that could move mountains. I promise. She stepped forward into the light, ready to begin again, ready to rebuild. The golden afternoon sun spilled gently through the windows of Isabel's small, cozy home, casting a soft glow over the living room. The space was quiet, peaceful, a sanctuary. She sat on the worn couch, her arms wrapped around her newborn daughter, holding her close. The baby let out a tiny yawn and snuggled deeper against her mother's chest. The scent of lavender lingered in the air, and a soft melody played from a speaker tucked on a nearby shelf. It wasn't the life Isabel had imagined a year ago, but it was hers, and it was enough. She glanced around the room, the second-hand furniture she had chosen with care, the colorful baby toys scattered across the floor, the framed ultrasound on the mantel. Everything in this space had been built with her own two hands. And for the first time, she felt proud. Isabel thought back on the long road that had brought her here. The betrayal, the courtroom, the fear that she wasn't enough. The nights she cried herself to sleep, the mornings she had to force herself to get up and keep going. But here she was, still standing, still fighting, and holding the most precious part of her future in her arms. It wasn't easy, she said softly, looking down at her sleeping daughter's face, but we're stronger now. She brushed a kiss across her baby's forehead. And I'll teach you never to settle for less than you deserve. No one will ever take advantage of us again. Her voice didn't waver. It was filled with determination and love. Meanwhile, far from the warmth and light, Derek sat alone in a stark gray prison cell. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, casting a sterile glow over the cold concrete. He leaned against the metal bed frame, his head bowed, his body weighed down by the silence. The tailored suit was long gone, replaced by the orange jumpsuit of a man who had lost everything. The smirk that once clung to his face had vanished. All that remained was a hollow shell and the echo of his own choices. He thought about the money, the admiration, the lifestyle, the lies. And then, he thought about Isabel. He thought about the way she had stood tall in court, unafraid, unshakable. The image gnawed at him. For the first time in a long time, regret twisted in his chest. Not anger, not pride, but something colder, emptier. How had it come to this? He buried his face in his hands. The walls around him didn't move, but they felt like they were closing in just the same. His world, once full of sparkle and illusion, was now reduced to a stark gray box and the wreckage of the lies he'd built it on. And in a quiet house filled with love and lavender, Isabel whispered to her daughter once more, "We're going to be just fine." And this time, she didn't just believe it. She knew it. Dear friend, life has a way of breaking us, and then slowly, quietly offering us the tools to rebuild. Like Isabel, we all face moments where everything we believed in collapses, where betrayal darkens the light we once trusted. But as the Stoics remind us, the obstacle is the way. What hurts can also shape us. What ends can also begin something new. Isabel didn't wait for life to get easier. She chose to grow stronger. She didn't crumble under the weight of her pain. She rose, holding her child and her dignity like armor. The peace she now holds wasn't handed to her. She earned it. And so can you. You are not what happens to you. You are what you choose to become after. If this story moved you even just a little, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep telling stories that speak to the heart.